Hi, and
Hi,
welcome back.
everybody.
Welcome back to Poo2Play. Hi, Charmaine. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Sam. I'm good. Very excited to be here again.
Oh, I know
Doesn't
it's
seem
great.
possible that another week has come round, does
I
it?
know it, and especially in the summer holidays as well. So everybody who's watching this sort of as we're going along, it's currently the summer holidays. If you're catching up later on, we're recording in the summer holidays, and that is how committed we are. You see, we're using our summer holidays to bring this to you. But yeah, today's episode is tired, wired, and full of feeling, the sleep, poo, and mood connection. And today, Charmaine of Clear Steps Consultancy, I'll let you introduce yourself properly in a minute, and myself, Dr. Sam Ballington of the Association of Child and Family Coaches, will be bringing together the behaviour element sort of inside and outside of the body and how it all connects. So, Charmaine, tell our audience what you do, who you are, your specialisms, and things like that.
Yeah, of course. I'm a mum living in a neurodivergent household, first and foremost, but I'm also
Mm.
a continent sleep and understanding emotions consultant here at Clear Steps Consultancy, and I've been supporting children with and without a diagnosis for over 30 years and set up Clear Steps Consultancy about 10 years ago. And I support children, their families, schools, and professionals in looking at toileting, sleep, and understanding emotions. And I do that through a gut health and nervous system lens, looking at what's happening inside the body and outside the body. Hence why this is very, very relevant. Um, and looking at sort of how we can help children to sort of recognize, understand, and respond to those sensations and feelings that they have inside as well as out, and how that they are all connected, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So how about
Exactly.
you, Sam? What are you,
So
your
hi,
background?
I'm Sam, Dr. Sam Ballington of the Association of Child and Family Coaches, and my work is predominantly these days very much around research, training, development of practitioners who are working in the early years in schools, understanding behaviours and so on. I'm also a mum in a neurodivergent household, and that I have a daughter with SPD and ASD. I say the letters over the names sometimes because I don't always necessarily agree with what the letters stand for. But and also neurodivergent myself as well. And yeah, lots of work in that space. And I look at the sort of the wide picture in a holistic way, and with Charmaine bringing in that gut health together and how that connects to the brain, we're really demonstrating that whole holistic element. So, this is why the Poo2Play podcast is so important, because it just brings all of that research from both of our sort of lenses together to help parents and to empower parents and carers to be able to advocate for their children when they're struggling.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously today we're sort of focusing around sort of sleep. And
Yes.
sleep is such a huge topic, isn't it? And I think it's one of those, of all the topics, it's one of those areas where if you just got enough sleep,
Yeah.
we could almost feel like you could do, you know what it's like yourself when you haven't had enough sleep, everything just sort of feels so much more effort, doesn't it? Sort of everything's like lethargic and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And that's just us.
Yeah. So for children, it's going to be, 10 times harder because they're not necessarily going to understand that it's because they haven't had enough sleep
Yeah,
either. I bet we've all, any parents here who, have experienced babies and young children, toddlers. It's like, you're tired. You're crying because you're tired. Just go to sleep. Nobody is stopping you. But of course, that overtiredness is actually impacting. how their brain is functioning or not functioning. It's overwhelming. The feelings that they have because they're tired is stress.
Yeah,
And, that is what is stopping them go to sleep. And even us as adults, sometimes we feel so exhausted in the day and we're like, I can't wait to get into bed tonight. You hit the pillow and you are just awake all night
yeah,
because you're still hyper alert and stressed because the endless cycle is
yeah.
you were
And
tired
yeah,
and so
exactly. And
you
then when
didn't get what you needed to do done and you're stressed out about it. So
yeah,
yeah.
and then when you're sort of supporting your child who's going through that as well, it's almost like because then you're really exhausted and tired, and then you're trying to help your child who's exhausted and tired, and everything's sort of up there, isn't it? So when we're sort of
Absolutely.
thinking about, so obviously our episode is sort of looking at tired, wired, and full of feeling. What
Mm.
what are we actually focusing on when we're saying tired but wired? What are we actually thinking that that looks like?
So we are looking at children, right, who are starting to act silly sometimes, sort of that stroppiness might come out, lots of energy that wasn't there before, and there's no reason for it, but it's actually coming out in a negative way. Okay. You know, and this is where adults can understandably become quite confused by their children's behavior because as adults, we tend to imagine tiredness as looking sleepy,
The traditional,
yawning.
oh yes, I'm
Yeah,
tired now. Yeah.
exactly. Oh, don't do that because I will catch
No,
it.
sorry.
I will catch it.
No yawning, no yawning.
Oh, no. The yawning, the slowing
But
down,
we
rubbing
don't
the
see that though, do
eyes.
we, with the children that we
We
support?
we
That's not what we're
don't. They
seeing.
become more physical. They become more emotional. I think we get that as adults though, don't we?
Yeah.
And much more frustrated, running around, climbing, crashing into things. There's lots of movement. And they may suddenly find sort of instructions that we give them sort of impossible to comprehend as well. So something that would normally be a very manageable transition, so brushing teeth, putting pajamas on, switching the television off. It all
They sound
becomes time on the
so
floor.
simple, don't they? So
Yeah,
simple. Just
yeah,
go and brush your teeth. But
yeah,
just in that one transition, like stopping what you're doing to
yeah,
going to the but that is a transition in itself.
yeah.
It's but sometimes people think like those transitions are sort of going from the house to the car or the house to the school or that is but actually those mini or micro transitions
Yeah.
can be huge for us, especially when we're thinking about sleep, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because what's actually we are seeing is a nervous system that has reached its capacity, haven't we?
Yeah,
And I think that, I talk a lot about regulation because that's where a lot of my work focuses on. But we all reach a certain amount of capacity for coping with demands, for processing sensory information, for emotions, frustration, and those that change. So those micro moments that you're talking about. When we're rested and feeling well, that capacity is usually great, larger, greater. But when we're exhausted, uncomfortable, hungry or hangry, as I tend to get, stressed or unwell, it shrinks. And that includes very much when we're tired. Children who have less developed regulation skills to begin with, are going to, of course, struggle with the demands when those less regulation skills are combined with tiredness
yeah,
and the demands of the whole day. They might have been to nursery or school. There's those transitions, there's the noise, social interactions, the expectations. By the evening time, when it's time to go to bed, there's just simply no capacity left, is there?
yeah, yeah. And I think that sort of whole idea about capacity is almost like we sort of look at that capability and
Yeah.
capacity because and I think that's where sometimes the confusion can be, can't it? Because often as parents we think you are more than capable of going to sleep. Yesterday you went to sleep. But like you say, we need to look at, or like last week, I remember you just went to sleep, you got that capability. But it's really important to look at that capacity because, like you say, in that day, in that moment, they may not have that. And that's what to look at the difference, isn't it? It's so
That's it.
important, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah.
And one of your first signs is going to be when you get a cup out the cupboard and it's the wrong color. That, that is
You
your
never
child.
realized that a blue instead of a red could be the
Okay.
final straw.
And that is
And
the
we're laughing.
sign,
Obviously, we
isn't
don't
it?
mean that, if you're going through that, we know it's not a laughing matter, but you have to sort of step back and just think it is just a cup. But
Yeah.
for our children in that moment,
It's not.
it's literally the last the
Yeah.
last thing. That sort of
It's just everything has just become too much, and that's the
yeah,
last straw.
yeah,
Exactly that.
yeah. Definitely.
And bedtime itself can expose lots of things that have been easier to ignore during the day, because
Yeah.
obviously bedtime is a huge transition because that's the time when we stop and we, you know, go to sleep. The day is ending. It puts everything to an end. Whereas in the day, everything is sort of carrying on. Children are playing, moving, learning, all of these different things that are happening. They're interacting with people, and there's that stimulation everywhere. At bedtime, everything becomes quieter and still, and suddenly everything is more noticeable. So, all of those sensations that children have actually potentially been feeling throughout the day, you know, have become more noticeable to them, and they might suddenly, you know, have an uncomfortable tummy, a tummy ache. That, and parents may say, and I've been, guilty of this, oh, well, you didn't have a tummy ache before. Why do you suddenly have a tummy ache now at bedtime? And we might think they're playing up, but actually, the reality is everything is quieting down and everything is more noticeable. And that tummy ache has been there throughout the day, but it's more noticeable when all of the stimulants around the children are not there anymore.
Yeah.
So
And
that
for those
tummy
heightened
ache,
senses, isn't it? So it's almost like rather than just listening out for what's outside of the body,
yeah,
it's almost like you're listening out for what's happening inside the body, isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, Charmaine, that could actually be a signal, couldn't it, that there is a problem with the poo side of things too. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we're thinking about, obviously, in past episodes, we've been talking about sort of poo and what we're sort of looking for. And we said that we were looking for my chart. Just grab that for us.
Hmm.
Um, we said that we were looking for our type 4 medium poo. And we were saying that we wanted that either 3 times a day or 3 or 4 times a week. So when our children are not passing these type 4 medium poos in that way, it means that our children can have that build-up of poo. And when we said a build-up of poo can be constipation, and we mentioned before about constipation not just being when our children don't go, it
Hmm.
can be the type of poo, how often they go, but also the size of the poo. So when we're thinking about sleep and all of that other noise sort of going away, and our children just laying and relaxing, so when our children are relaxing, it then means that the muscles are then able to, it relaxes. When our children relax to go to sleep, it's not just, um, you know, their outer body that's relaxing, it's actually their internal body as well. So it's actually relaxing that sort of the gut. And we said the gut is like starts at the mouth and it goes all the way through from the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and the large bowel. So all of that then relaxes, which then means our children's poo can then begin to move while they're in bed. So this can then affect children when they're going off to sleep. So our children can then say, like you said, that my tummy hurts and they need to go to the toilet. Or it can be that our children do go off to sleep, but then they're waking at 2, 3 in the morning. So they're waking in the night. And that'll be because that everything is relaxed. The muscles are then able to push any poos that may have built up there, push that round. And then rather than them being sort of like a soft poo, like we said, that type 4 medium poo, it could be that it's like a harder or drier poo.
Mm.
Because when it's in the large bowel, it's taking and absorbing all that water. So it could be that it's drier. So if we sort of imagine like um, this is sort of like the large bowel, like sort of inside, and this is the poo, it's almost like it sort of scrapes along. And if that's drier and harder, it's almost like that is what is feeling uncomfortable for our children as
Mm.
it's moving around in the body. And so that can actually influence our children, like either going off or actually in the night, sort of waking as well. Um, so they may not know that that's actually the poo that's doing that. So
Mm.
it may just be that they're waking up and they're upset, or they're just waking up and actually maybe wanted to come into bed with you. And you just think, no, 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 you've got your own bed. Like, and if they had gone off to sleep, right? You went off to sleep, that whole capability and
Mm.
capacity. They had the capability because they didn't feel that poo going off to sleep, but they haven't got the capacity in the middle of the night because it's woken them up and it feels uncomfortable. So
Absolutely.
so it's just
Yeah,
looking at both of those, isn't it?
exactly that. And then we end up with the sort of the flip side, don't we? So what happens then if children are not getting enough sleep? Does that impact sort of how the poo is going through the body as well then?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about that, we're thinking about that gut-brain connection. So we're thinking about what's happening inside the body directly
Yeah.
influences our thoughts, feelings, of ability and capacity to be able to go off to sleep. And also it's if so when we're sort of thinking about sleep, we're thinking about that circadian rhythm. So we're thinking about eating,
Yeah.
drinking, using the toilet, and exercising and moving at set times. If
Yeah.
then we're not able to, and then obviously sleeping at set times as well, that's all part of that. But if we're not able to sleep at set times because the poo's moving around, it's then waking us, then we're starting the day. Like as many children that I support, their families will reach out and they'll say, you know, I sort of say, how can we help? What is it that you're looking for to learn? And they'll say, I just want to sleep. My child, we're starting the day at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I cannot, and we're not going to bed until 11, 12. So they're literally just getting like a couple of hours sleep. And it was a family I worked with recently. It was that exact situation. Um,
Mhm.
and you haven't got those set, you can't have your eating at set times to then prepare the body because we need to prepare the body throughout the day, but
Mhm.
then to then be ready to be able to go to sleep. So
Exactly.
often we sort of think that sleep happens when we get into bed, but it kind of starts from when we get up in the morning, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
routine I often say sort of is influenced by what's happening in the day, and then the actual bedtime routine would start like from when we get back from school, so that sort
Yeah.
of time. But the body needs to be prepared for the day, but that's why it's sort of influencing.
Hmm.
If we haven't got those set times, we haven't got that circadian rhythm working as it needs to be, the body's not going to then be prepared.
Exactly. And the child is going to wake up tired, the parents, of course, as well. But if the child is waking up tired, they're not going to necessarily want breakfast. Everything about getting ready for nursery or school becomes stressful. And potentially, it's then going to affect everything that goes on during the day, their play experiences and their learning experiences and their communication. All of that is going to be impacted. And then, of course, their toileting routine naturally sort of disappears along with it, doesn't it? They go into school or nursery with less capacity. They are therefore not able to recognize their body signals as they normally might. And then we get, we reach the evening again,
We've got
and we're
this.
stuck in this
Yeah,
cycle.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important. So when you think about sort of like when we're thinking about toileting, we're thinking
Mhm.
about our children. Say if we pick on poo, for instance, we're thinking about those poos being passed either 3 times a day or 3 or 4 times a week,
Yeah.
but in the daytime.
Yes.
So we're thinking about those poos being passed like 20 to 30 minutes after they've had something to eat because that's the body process. That's what's happening. But when our children are out of that, if we're struggling with that sleep, we're struggling with
Mhm.
the circadian rhythm, it then means that our children may start actually passing those poos in the night. And that
Yes.
again is then another sort of key thing that is sort of saying, aha, we need to be looking at the poo. Let's have a look to see what type of poo our children are actually passing, because that is then is like a key sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that it always comes back to that, doesn't it? The poo. Because I think one of the things I'm going to say now, just to remind our audience really, is that when I've been delivering in education, for over 2 decades now, working in the early years, delivering early years training, writing early years textbooks, delivering early years talks, looking at the EYFS and everything in terms of development. We look at cognition and we look at physical development, which does include self-care, in terms of can the child eat independently and so on? Can the child get into a routine? Are they going to be ready for school? But one thing we don't really harness in on, even though we have started to look at nutrition, and the new nutrition guidance came in a year ago, but we are not really, we don't talk about poo. And that is why Charmaine and I have come together, because we need to, our educators need to as well. So this podcast isn't just for our parents, it is for our educators as well. Our early years educators, and our teachers, need to have that understanding behind them too, because we're not getting that in our training, in our
Yeah,
early years educator training, in our teacher training. It's not coming through. So I think I just wanted to reinforce that that is why Charmaine and I have come together, because Charmaine fills a huge gap in the training that we deliver in, and what the DFE require us to deliver to our early years educators as well. So thank you for, joining me on this journey together.
no,
So
but I think you're right though, because I think, and it's not just, I think when you sort of think about like the training and the education
mm,
sort of side of things, it's almost like, well, poo, that's a very private thing, that's sort of separate, so keep that there. But
mm,
equally, when we sort of, because obviously today we're talking about poo and sleep, you sort of think, well, sleep, you think, well, we don't need to be talking about that in schools because that has nothing to do. We don't have any children that are sleeping here. Obviously, if we're looking at our early years, when we're looking at nursery, we're obviously looking at nap
mm,
times and that type of thing. So maybe they're looking a little bit more. But when we're looking at primary school, secondary school, we're not thinking about sleep at all. We don't need to be thinking about that. But actually, it's actually going to have a direct impact on how
mm,
those children are going to present,
yep,
how they're going to, experience school, how they're going to be able to focus, everything about
yeah,
that sort of side of things.
exactly
So
that. Yeah.
yeah, I suppose that's sort of a good point to sort of just think about sort of looking at what's underneath that behavior
Mhm.
when we're sort of thinking about what, you know, yeah, when we're thinking about the behavior and what we're actually seeing.
Yeah.
and what's
Exactly
actually
that.
happening. Yeah.
Exactly that, because that cycle that we were talking about earlier, it, as you say, it interrupts everything, doesn't it? So if they've had that poor sleep, is that gut health connection that you were talking about as well, gut brain connection that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and everything interlinks and everything is holistically sort of joined together. And that is why we have that cycle. We might begin with poor sleep. Poor sleep means we're tired during the day. Tiredness means less capacity for regulation. When regulation is down, routines are harder. And then toileting becomes more difficult. And then if poo is held, or constipation develops, we then have that physical discomfort. Physical discomfort then contributes to bigger emotions, irritability, and that overwhelm. The bigger emotions, mean that there's more discomfort, harder to settle to sleep, and suddenly we've become full cycle,
Yeah.
haven't we? And so it's really, really important that we have an understanding of, you know, that getting that routine. But how do we, how can we help our families who are experiencing that sleep issue, and it's connected to poo? Our child's getting up in the middle of the night going for a poo, and that is what our families are noticing at the moment. How do we help them?
So I always say that let's start in the daytime. So I know
Hmm.
it's about sleep and about us going to sleep, but like we say, we need to look at the day to
Yeah.
see what's happening there. So what I would always say is to try and see about what we can do with that eating and drinking routine. So can we establish, so obviously if we're going to bed, whatever sort of times that may be, that's already happened. But what we need to do
Mm.
is to actually start at a set time and then we have a bedtime. So I appreciate that often we don't necessarily, our children aren't necessarily going to go to sleep at that set time, but we sort of have those sort of times. So then when we're starting at a set time, so whatever that would be, it needs to be something that is going to be right for that child, whether it's in the week and at a weekend,
Hmm.
regardless of the day of
Yeah.
the week, because that's the consistency. So we have that set time of starting, and then we want to have like breakfast, lunch, evening meal, and then we're ready sort of. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get back that circadian rhythm, those set times to help that body prepare for sleep. That's what we're trying to do. And obviously that, if we're having those set times, it then not only helps with the sleep, it helps with the poo as well. Because
Yeah.
then we're then, once we've eaten, our bodies, everything quickens up when we eat, and then we're more likely to need to go to the loo, and then we can put in that toilet in. But if we've got all different sort of times, and obviously there are obviously exceptions with that. So there are sort of when we're looking at our children who are struggling like with their sensory processing and their sense of touch, we're thinking about those touch sensations in the mouth, which obviously we'll be talking about in our next episode. So watch that. But when we're thinking about that, it can be difficult to actually have that routine
Mm.
of sort of set times. And it means that sometimes our children may eat at all different times, but you know, if we can start to sort of help our children to have that routine, that's what
Yeah.
it can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think you said something really, really important then as well. And that was about the days of the week, and including the weekends in that, because I think, we start to do things differently at the weekend, don't we?
Mm.
Relax more, everything's a
Yeah,
bit later sometimes. We don't have that rush in the morning, for sort of get a breakfast down you because we've got to leave the house. I mean, I'm talking a generalization, of course. We
yeah,
might be
yeah,
very busy at the weekends sometimes. But it's important, isn't it, to try and continue, especially if we're struggling, with that sleep. It's important to try and continue that routine, try and avoid those lions, for the children on the weekend, because
yeah.
all that is going to do is impact that Monday, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we have that
And it's
lion, the
also,
late nights, yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I was going to say, so it's not just the weekends, it's the holidays as well.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
that's where it can be really difficult, when you've got half term or you've got the 6 weeks holiday, autumn holiday, whatever it is, it's automatic. You're like, that's it, we don't need to do that. And there doesn't
Yeah.
need to be the rush. But I think when you're thinking about the time that's going to be right for your child and your family, you're thinking, actually, will this work when it's a weekend
Yeah.
and it's the holidays? So maybe breakfast isn't at 4 in the morning. Maybe we sort of make it a little bit later, so that
Mhm.
actually you don't have to have that at that time. You know, if it's, would 6 o'clock work? Would 7 o'clock work? Would 8 o'clock work? And actually, I'll get everything ready the night before, because just so that I can have breakfast a bit later, because then I know I can cope with that the weekend. It's looking at the bigger picture. And I
Yeah.
think when you're in it, and this is what families tell me all the time when I'm working with them, when you're in that situation, you cannot process that because you're so tired.
Yeah.
We're talking about sleep and we're talking about how we can sort of help, but sometimes it's just so much when you're in that you just, listening to something like this is just like, okay, yeah, I could do that. We can
Yeah.
do this. Yeah, I can do
Yeah.
that. Why haven't I done that before? That's what
Yeah.
families often say to me. I went, why haven't I done that before? And I said, but that's because I might have had a bit of sleep, and I can think about your situation, whereas you're in it, and it's sometimes really difficult to see things when you're in it, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's the wood for the trees
Yeah,
sort of thing,
yeah,
isn't it? It's like when you are in it and you are stressed, it's very, very difficult to even look at the solutions that can really appear
yeah,
quite simple from the outside.
yeah,
And yeah, it's once you're into that routine and you found the routine that works for your family, then you're going to get into that rhythm. It's going to be a lot more healthier for everybody in terms of everything, externally, how that will be for your child to be able to understand when breakfast time is, when it's time to get ready for school, or when it's time to get ready for the day if it's not a school day,
yeah,
when it's time to play, when it's time to do X, Y, and Z, and so on. And then we get to that sort of later period in the day where it's time to start to wind down. And what we really want to do is be in a routine that works, like for the family. So, when is a suitable bedtime? And we want to start that routine at the same time in a school week as we would, you know, we want to mirror that in our weekends and in our holidays as
yeah,
well. Because then we keep that routine going. Then the poo routine starts to come and
yeah.
settle. And then we have our peaceful night times.
I would just like to say that this, I've done this many, many years, um, and it works. But I would just say we're not saying that it's just we'll do this tonight and that's it. It's all going to work. You know, it's not something that you just sort of try on the Monday and by the Tuesday, everything's fine. It's something that we try on the Monday, we try on the Tuesday, the Wednesday,
Yeah,
we keep going. But we're
exactly.
here, I suppose it's just sort of sharing that actually it does work.
Yeah.
It does work. Um, and I think sometimes when you're trying when I think especially with sleep, it's almost like let's try that tonight. Well, that didn't work last month. Okay, let's try this tonight. Well, that still didn't work. Okay. So by the end of the week, you've then tried about 3 or 4 different things.
And
And
there's
then
just
when
overwhelm
yeah,
everywhere, isn't
it's
there?
overwhelmed for the family, but also for the
Yeah,
child. You haven't got that
yeah,
consistency. And when we're
yeah,
thinking about our autistic children,
yeah.
we need to
And a
have
routine.
that
You need to get it
predictability.
in.
And then all of a sudden, without realizing it, and no fault of anybody's, because this is not about blame at all, no fault of anybody's, by just trying those different things, we've we've then got that unpredictability.
Hmm.
and they
Exactly.
need that certainty for that bedtime routine. So that's why we're saying just start with that one thing and just keep going with that, because that's going to give you that foundation. And then if you do need any help, obviously we're here to help you with those next stages. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that sort of concludes where we wanted to be today and keeps our message. And we were, Charmaine's already touched on what we're going to
yeah,
talk about in the next
sorry.
episode. So make sure you,
I was
no,
trying
make
to
sure you
hold back. I
attend.
was like,
That's
oh no.
great. It's like, and I love that. We haven't used our word curious today. If you've
But
been
we
with
do need to
us.
be curious about sleep, though, don't
Exactly.
we?
We do, we do. But this is where we do our fancy thing at the end, or try to. If you've been watching us, this is just a bit of fun that we have a little bet going on in terms of we don't really, but in terms of when we are going to get this spot on. So here we go. Are we ready? Stay curious.
Because every behavior has a story.
And
From
from Poo
poo
to
to
Play,
play,
we're
we're
here
here
to
to
help you
help you
understand
understand what
what might
might
be
be happening beneath
beneath the
the surface.
surface.
So close, so close.
Amazing. We're getting there, Charmaine. We are
Yeah.
getting there. Fantastic. Thank you so much to our
No,
audience
yeah.
who
And
are
thank you,
joining us.
Sam. Thank you
Thank you,
for your time.
Charmaine. Yeah, and I hope what we're doing is giving value to our families. So thank you so much for listening. Take care. Thank
And we'll
you.
speak to you soon.
Bye.